Hey everyone, Shaun Stevenson here, co-author of the Parable Port series, helping you find your next retro read. And today, since it is spooky season, I decided to go back to a book I actually read a little while ago, but never got around to reviewing it. This series is always a little difficult to talk about because it has a lot of theology in it. I am a children's pastor, so when I read books that have faith or theology in them, I like to really dive into it and think about it and very critically analyze it, since that's an area of expertise for me. So I did read book number 4 in the Forbidden Doors series, The Haunting by Bill Myers. Now, this series came out in the 90s. It's a YA series, and they kind of look about the same size as a Fear Street book. And I really believe this was the Christian Fear Street, so to speak, a series that was put out by Tyndale Publishers, and each book kind of tackles different subjects that have to do with Satan and with demons in particular. And in this series, you have these teen kids who are literally battling demons, and it's pretty intense, I'm not gonna lie. Some of them are there's some goofy moments here and there, especially with the brother Scott, who's the younger brother of the main character Becca, and Scott brings some goofiness here and there, but there are some kind of terrifying moments, especially in book number 4, and we're gonna talk about it. This one kind of takes the past 3 books. There's been 3 books in the series up to this point: The Society, The Deceived, and The Spell. And I would almost say that those 3 books are kind of introductions to this whole world that's going on. In these books, you have this brother and sister duo, Scott and Becca. They're former missionary kids, so they had grown up in another country as missionaries. And after their father passed away, mom moved back to California with her 2 kids, Scott and Becca. And so now they are trying to figure out, how is life been going in the United States, because they've not been around a little while. And they're kind of trying to play catch up, and they sometimes feel a little bit like the odd ones out. And as they're going to school and trying to figure out where they fit in, they soon find out that how they fit in is battling demons in their town. And it gets pretty wild, I am not gonna lie. In this book, you have this lady who works at this shop called the Ascension Bookshop. And at the Ascension Bookshop, they sell a lot of different occult things, Ouija boards, amulets, charms, all this kind of stuff. And so this lady, she comes to Scott and Becca and asks for their help because she believes that there is this house that is being haunted by a little girl named Juanita, who she is haunting this house and wants to be freed from this house in particular. So Scott and Becca decide to help out this lady, and as they're trying to figure out what's going on in this house, they soon discover that it's not a ghost in that house. It's a demon, and not just one demon, but multiple demons. And now they are trying to figure out how to fight these demons and get them out of this house and out of this area. And it is a wild journey, let me tell you. I will also say this book is very interesting because, like I said, the first 3 books were kind of like the introduction. And with book number 4, you kind of have this jumping off point into the next 3 books in the series, which really do build on each other. There are plot points and threads that start in this actual book that weave throughout the next 3 books. These books, I would say you do have to read them in order if you're going to read them. They're not like Fear Street where you can read any of them in any order. You do have to read them in order to really understand what's going on in the storyline and what's happening. And this one really sets up a kind of a 3-book arc that starts with this one and goes into books 5, The Guardian, and book 6, The Encounter. And so in this one, you've got all kinds of things going on, from automatic handwriting to possessions to astrology. There's all these different topics that this book is trying to tackle, and it is the longest one at this point in the series. And so I would say that it almost is trying to bite off a lot more than it can chew, really, and focus on just like perhaps the haunting aspect of this book and not as much on the astrology and on the automatic handwriting and some of those things that are going on. But in this one, we really do have this haunted house kind of as a backdrop. There are some very creepy scenes in the haunted house that are pretty terrifying and are pretty disturbing, honestly. I think you have a lot of interesting moments when they're in the house, different spooky things that take place, because up to this point, Becca and Scott have not really encountered a demon like face to face. It's almost been a little bit more in the background, the demons that are at play here in this town. And so Becca and Scott now are like face to face with the demons. This book is part of a genre of Christian books called spiritual warfare books. Spiritual warfare books are all about the idea of like, we are not just, it's not just the physical plane that exists, but there's a spiritual level to everything that's going on, and that there are demons and there are angels and they are fighting each other, and God exists and also Satan exists. Now, in spiritual warfare, God is never equal to Satan, and demons and angels actually are kind of on the same level, but God is more powerful than any of those other things. And so they have to rely on God and their faith in order to defeat these demons. And it's intense, let me tell you. There's also a lot of theology and like discussion about angels and demons and Satan and like what kind of power do people have over demons and how do Christians have power over demons. And it's a very interesting discussion, but it's a lot of discussion. There are whole chapters in this book where they are just discussing these different topics, and it almost comes across not as much like a story as a sermon. And this is something that's a little difficult in Christian books, when books that are written from a Christian perspective, maybe by a Christian author, they're trying to, talk about Jesus, talk about the Bible, talk about these theological topics in an entertaining way. They sometimes start with the topic and then create a story, instead of starting with the story and seeing what topic comes out of it. So in this one, I almost feel like Bill Myers was kind of given this task of, okay, talk about astrology, talk about automatic handwriting, talk about hauntings and possessions. And it's kind of what he built the story around instead of writing the story. Now, I will say though, all that said, I never was bored reading this book. I was highly intrigued. I want to know what happens. Bill Myers has a very cinematic way of writing where he kind of like cuts back and forth, like almost like a movie that is very action-packed and like lots of cut edits from character to character, like different things happening. There are moments throughout this book where we are flashing from place to place and figuring out what's going on with these people and what's happening with these people and what's going on over here. And there's like even moments where there's like 4 paragraphs and then it breaks to another section. And it's pretty moves along very fast. It's a very, very fast-paced read. And you never do feel bored while reading it. However, like I said though, it is dense with a lot of different theological ideas. And where a lot of the theology in this book comes from is from a particular stream of Christianity, a denomination called Assemblies of God. Assemblies of God, they are a denomination that is a little more like prone to thinking about demons, thinking about Satan, not in worshiping demons or Satan, but in fighting demons and Satan. And kind of looking at life as there's a lot of demonic things going on in the world that are the result of demons and Satan at work in the world. And so a lot of times they believe that they can pray against these demons. They can fight against these demons by asking in Jesus's name for them to leave or to be banished from a place or to come out of a possessed person. So there's a lot of that theology is baked into this book. And so that's not my actual particular stream of what I think about some of those topics. I have some different views about it, it'll take too long to get into if we get into it right now. But this one, it's a very interesting book from that perspective, because it definitely takes that whole idea of all this spiritual warfare and all these different things and boils it into this book. And at the end of the day, does present a very entertaining story that I wanted to keep reading. Now, I read this series a long time ago, like over 20 years ago, and I really enjoyed them then. And rereading them, I have been a little nervous because I'm like, oh, I really enjoyed reading these back in the day, and I know some of my thoughts have changed about a lot of things since I was a teenager. And so I kind of am like, oh, am I gonna like this still? I hope so. And fortunately, I still do like it. I do think, though, there are some different things that I'm not as much a fan of. One of the things that this series does that I don't really love, and I will say, I feel like Bill Myers is trying to have this conversation, but sometimes Christians can almost make people who do not believe in Jesus into what they perceive as enemies. And they talk about them as enemies or people that they're fighting against because X, Y, or Z. And in this book, there's a lot of discussion about loving others, being kind to others, but it's kind of tempered with this idea of, but they're still kind of our enemy, even though we're supposed to love them. And I personally don't love that kind of discussion. I feel like we are called to be loving towards all people. I think that's really important. I think that's, in my personal beliefs, that's who God, calls us to be, loving to God, loving to others. That's what I feel like, and I don't think any person is my enemy. I just don't think like that. Like, sure, there are people out there that do trolly things or are not nice to you. Yes, but I'm not going to call them my enemy. I'm just not going to do that because I don't believe in that. So I think that this book series has almost like it's saying this, where we're saying like, yeah, we need to be loving and kind to everyone, but over here, we're still going to call this person our enemy. And I did have a little bit of a problem with that. I felt like that kind of idea is just not the best. I just don't like us versus them kind of thinking, because I think it becomes too binary. People become too focused on my team versus their team. And I just personally don't think that's who we're supposed to be as human beings. I think we're supposed to be on one team, like working together for the good of everybody. I think that's really what's important, and to be kind to one another, no matter who they are, no matter what background they come from, it doesn't matter. You're called to be loving towards others. That's who Jesus presents himself to be in the books in the New Testament in the Bible. Jesus is presented as, God who is showing God's love to people that are on the margins and people that are not normally part of the conversation. Jesus brings into the conversation and shows his love and grace and goodness towards. And I just feel like that is the posture that people should have, not the posture of, you're my enemy, so I'm not going to really talk to you. But when I do talk to you, I'm going to kind of make fun of you and make jokes about you, because that's kind of what happens in this book. So, I feel like whenever I talk about Forbidden Doors, we get into all kinds of different discussions because there's so many different things to talk about with these books. And like I said, since I am a children's pastor, I think a lot about how faith and Christianity intersect these stories, and I think it's important. Now, all of that set aside, the storyline here is pretty interesting. There's some mystery going on here. There are some details that you find out slowly as you go through the book. And I did think those parts of the story were excellent. And you have a very, very creepy setup for the next book. And for book number 6 gets set up in this book. You have one of the characters who is, let's just say, introduced to something, and it becomes a problem. And I really liked that plot line. Now, spoiler, I have reread books 5 and 6 already. So I actually have this whole arc in my head, even now as I'm talking about book number 4. And I really, really enjoyed the arc that starts in this book. And actually, this one and book number 6 are the most intense, I think, of the first 6 books in this 12-book series. And they go there. There's a lot of really creepy stuff that happens, like I said. And in this one in particular, like, you have some really terrifying moments when they're in the house, they're facing down this demon, and it is intense what goes on. And so it definitely is not one to read lightly, but also if you usually don't read Christian books, I would say go into this one knowing you're going to get a lot of discussion about the Bible and about the theology of demons and Satan and all these sorts of things. So this one is a really interesting mixed bag, in my opinion. So at the end of the day, what do I rank this book? Because it's intense, but it has some issues like I talked about, but I still really enjoyed this book a lot. I read it so fast. I flew through this thing because I just wanted to know what happened. And I forgot some of the details from a long time ago when I had read this. And so I really enjoyed it quite a bit. And so I would have to give this book a 4 out of 5 stars. I'm docking that 1 star for that whole discussion about the way that people treat each other and enemies and all this kind of stuff. That is where I'm docking a point, because otherwise, this was such a great, interesting read. I couldn't put it down. So this series is definitely not for everyone. It's definitely aimed, I think, at Christian readers, people who, are Christians, who believe in God. It's definitely aimed at, I think, that kind of an audience, like Christian readers who like spooky books. And so that's definitely where this book is going for. But I think you could enjoy it too if you aren't part of the Christian faith. I think you would find this interesting, but it might not be for you. So go into it knowing that. I think you'll pretty much know if you read book number 1, The Society, and depending on what you think of that book, that will kind of tell you what you're going to think about this series, because that book is very indicative of how this series is throughout its whole run. So those are my very complicated and twisting around thoughts about The Haunting, book number 4 in the Forbidden Door series by Bill Myers. And until next time, everybody, keep reading. Bye.